It's a clever effort.
Let's talk to one of the Libertarian candidates running for governor. Bill Gelanu is running for governor on the Libertarian Party ticket. In 2010, he ran for the Michigan Senate. In 2012, he ran for Congress. And in 2016, he ran for the Michigan House, all unsuccessfully. In the private sector, he's been a restaurant owner and was in real estate. He attended Wayne State and the U of M. Welcome to the program. Jonathan's got the first question.
Bill, Libertarians are appearing on Michigan's primary ballot this year for, I believe, the first time ever. It's because Gary Johnson got enough votes to qualify the party for the ballot. He got slightly less than 4% of the vote in the presidential election, but more than the 5% in the last Secretary of State election needed to make it. So Libertarians are on the ballot. I believe you're one of the only contested races on the ballot,
I think we are
the governor's race. Why does that matter that you're on the ballot?
Well, as you know, we were talking earlier about gerrymandering and how that's affected people's voting patterns. You know, with so many of the districts drawn in such a way that for many people they look at their races and if they're not paying attention to those top-of-ticket races that much, they don't have the real motivation to vote. So, you know, what's happened to the minor parties, the Libertarians and others over years, is they really get ignored. And the reason for that is they're considered to be marginal anyway. So having that unique opportunity now to be in the primary gets the attention early, and glad I could be here.
Were you a Democrat before?
I was many years ago.
In fact, you were a Jesse Jackson delegate?
Oh, 1984. Talk about ancient history.
So are you on the road to Damascus and somebody said to you, you don't want to be a D anymore, you want to be a Libertarian?
Oh, my goodness. I made that conversion 30 years ago. I'm a two-time chairman of the Libertarian Party of Michigan.
What happened?
Well, I think I kind of grew up a little bit. You know, I started reading more about the philosophies, and as the Democratic Party, you know, Ronald Reagan used the line, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. And I look at, I think in many ways, and you know, we talk often about the guy in Washington, whose name I try not to use much. He has appealed to people who, you know, working class folks who quite often voted Democratic in the past. And I think a lot of those people feel abandoned by the Democratic Party, and so they've moved away.
So, Bill, let me make a question, because I've heard you talk a lot about the issues, and it's obvious that you are passionate about libertarian-based issues. My question, though, appears to be that the Libertarians, it seems like in Michigan, are trying to appeal to disaffected Democrats and Republicans rather than appealing through issues. That it's sort of choose us because Republicans and Democrats both are awful, rather than choose us because we believe in issue A, B, or C. Do you think that's
I think
a
it's
fair?
both.
Okay.
I think it's always both. If you've been to my website, cometogethermichigan.org, that domain was chosen for a very specific reason, is that I think a lot of what's so dysfunctional in our politics relates to the fact that we just don't have conversations with the other side. You know, we pick up these colors, blue for Democrats and red for Republicans, which incidentally is the same colors used by the Bloods and the Crips. And quite often, you know, it's true that these parties act very much like gangs. You know, they protect each other. They cause a lot of damage along the way, and they don't really care that much about what taxpayers and citizens need.
But so that again sounds more like kind of the Gary Johnson vote for me so you don't have to vote for, you know, Trump or Hillary, rather than vote because I believe in marijuana legalization.
Well, I think it starts there, but if you go to my website, I think I've been probably out front of most of the candidates, including the Democrats and Republicans, frankly, in terms of talking about details of how the programs would work that fit into those libertarian philosophies.
Okay, well, Mr. Gelano, let me ask you, how does libertarianism relate to governance of the state of Michigan? We got a $57 billion budget. What would you do if you got in there as governor? What should be done differently with governing Michigan than what has been done with Republicans and Democrats running things?
Sure. And I think the most important thing, and Gary Johnson talked about this, is using those two aspects of, you know, both parties have some positive aspects to them. We believe in small government, and Republicans talk about that. And so we try to govern with that as a principle. But the other thing is social tolerance. And so it really comes with rearranging priorities. And probably the biggest issue that I've promoted is prison reform. And that's not something that libertarians alone talk about, but it certainly is a really high priority. That
you want to let people out of prison?
I do, especially people who have been convicted as part of the drug war that didn't also have a violent crime at the same time.
And people that are in there as juveniles, they ought to be let out too?
Well, again, these possession issues and things like this, they done people's careers, they affect where they can go to college, and I just believe that we've reached a time, and that's one of the reasons I've worked so hard to work for the legalization amendment.
So that's a way to save money and reduce the size of government.
It's one of them. It's one of
the
corrections.
What else?
The strategic fund. I've said it in other debates that Pure Michigan to me is pure BS. This is Chamber of Commerce stuff. If people want to come to the Lakeshore, then the business community and the Lakeshore ought to come together and do that. We shouldn't be putting that on the burden of taxpayers and people who are struggling to put food on the table and get to their jobs. And so it is a reorienting of priorities. And I think libertarians have been very consistent about how we talk about that.
Earlier this year, the State House voted, it didn't get approved, but to roll back completely Michigan's state income tax. Is that something that you would have voted for, or that you are for getting rid of Michigan's state income tax?
I think, yes, that certainly is a priority of the party. It is not at the top of my agenda because I think there's other things that need to be done so that we can demonstrate we can govern. And so when I talk about rolling back prisons, the number of people, we have 30% more people in prison than Ohio, Indiana, or Illinois. We have a prison culture. And so if we say, and I'm not the first person to talk about that, Jack Lessenberry wrote a great essay about this. And so I believe implementing that idea would free up a lot of money. Gosh, we might even fix some roads.
Bill, I've read your website, and one of the issues that I hadn't heard a lot about recently, you promote pretty heavily on the website, the idea of legalizing assisted suicide in Michigan. Why is that an issue you think that matters, and how does that gel with your libertarian ideals?
Well, one of Jack Kevorkian's early patients was someone who was connected to the Libertarian Party. And, our belief in self-determination, being able to have death with dignity, I think it's something that is important. After what had happened with the Kevorkian cases, other states, Oregon and others, have implemented very progressive, sensible death with dignity rules. And I'd like to see Michigan move in that direction.
And some people have said if you had the Libertarian Party, the only thing left in state government would be the state cops and the National Guard.
Well, I hear people say all kinds of things about what the party is. I am part of a practical wing, very much like Gary Johnson, that thinks we first need to show citizens that we can govern and take the budget as it is. I think there's plenty of money that can be reprioritized to make sure that roads and some of those problems with schools can be addressed.
Would you raise taxes to fix the roads?
Absolutely not. In fact, one of my big issues is to drop the cap. I want to demonstrate to the investment community that Michigan is never going to be a state like New Jersey or California. And the great Dick Headley, who helped put that limit in place, the budget right now is $10 billion below.
Would you sell bonds to fix the roads?
I would. I think that's a reasonable proposition, especially with rates being low.
What should government's role be right now in trying to help folks in Flint and recovering from the Flint water crisis? Is it a hands-off? I mean, is it putting money into the city, government money? What would be the libertarian viewpoint of how we fix Flint?
Well, as with the other parties, we struggle with, there's different wings of the party. So I speak just for myself, and I like to tell people, libertarian ideals do not control me, they inform me. And one of the things that's unique about Flint is that a lot of what went on there is government action that caused the problem. And so I think we do need to come up with a solution. But I've also talked about the broader problem with the environment. I've written 2 extensive treatises on environment on my website. And what's important about that is throughout the state, we've got problems with lead. 49507 in Grand Rapids has more kids affected with lead than all of Flint.
But don't you need government regulation and government rules to try to push to make sure that children are safe from lead?
And I think that establishing rules is one thing. It's a question of who runs the system. One of the things out in West Michigan, we have Lake Bella Vista, which is a private water system, and they run with all the same standards as the EPA, but their cost for delivering the product is much lower. And this is something I think we need to encourage, and especially when you're doing new development, where you're asking developers to put together new subdivisions. We need to explore how we can do that in a more environmentally sensible way.
When you say you are from the practical end of the libertarian spectrum, does that imply that your primary opponent, Mr. Tater, is maybe more of a purist ideologically? Is that the big difference between you?
I like John. He's a nice man. He has been in different parties and has had different perspectives. He's somewhat of a constitutional scholar. I've made it my business not to try to teach Michigan anything. I want to listen to voters and understand what their needs are, and then how we can use libertarian principles to maybe point a different direction.
There are some who believe libertarians are just a bunch of kooks, right? You've heard that.
Yeah, and you know, if you go to a Democratic meeting, you'll hear that Republicans are a bunch of kooks, and if you go to a Republican meeting, you'll hear that Democrats are a bunch of kooks. I found in most parties, and I've had the pleasure to know people in all the parties over the years, most people are pretty serious. There are fringe people, of course, and some of the things that I've had occur during my years as chairman, for example. I'm going to stand up like any citizen would to say, that's not who I'm about.
Are you going to win this primary? Because Mr. Tater, his name is spelled like the hockey player from the Red Wings, Tatar. And remember, Scotty Bowman has been one of your top vote getters as a libertarian over the years, kind of like the old Red Wing coach. You're up against Tater, looking like Tatar.
Take nothing for granted, and I assume nothing, but I work really hard. I have a big machine and a lot of people, probably at an unprecedented libertarian level.
You think you're going to be governor?
I'd like to be governor, and I think I could be. Never say never. Remember Thaddeus McCotter. I try to remind myself that lightning can strike and weird things can happen. But the most important mission I have is making sure that Michigan voters know more about what our philosophies are.
Thank you, sir. It's good to see you.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity.
Catch you guys next week right here on Off the Record.